Hey guys, happy Friday again. Today is August 30th, 2019, last business day of August. We are here at the Citrus Club. Super excited to have Ed Alexander on the show. We've got a lot to talk about. It's got a great topic, business relationships, the important. Hey Leslie, let us know the importance of. Let us know you can hear us and see us. Give us a thumbs up or a heart. Leslie, we still have to get you on the show. JP, what's up? Good afternoon. Hope everybody's trying to stay safe. We got a thumbs up, so we're good. We just heard a giant crack of lightning outside, so it's crazy. Oh, so you know Leslie. She's amazing. Welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you on here. I love when people connect with me and I come in blind. It's kind of my favorite thing. I love when there's a topic I like, and so as you guys know, one of my favorite things to do is ask questions when I'm learning just the same time you are. So everybody welcome Ed.
Hello.
Thanks for being on the show. All right, so we always like to start with origin story before we get to the topic. So tell us a little bit about you.
I'm a second career lawyer, right? So before I became a lawyer, I was a product marketing manager for a technology company. That was a long time ago, but...
Those seem like the complete opposite of each other.
Well, you know, I had a very technically oriented product, and so I would basically do deals that involved legal issues. And so after dealing with in-house counsel and putting deals together, I said this would be a cool job, and I went to law school. I worked there as well.
So what was the impetus to get you, like, you're a product marketing person,
right?
Very techie. What was the impetus for you to go, all right, hello Maribel, what was the impetus for you to go, I want to be an attorney? That seems like such a big stretch, and especially I love the second career attorney. What was the impetus behind that?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I also wrote code, so it's really kind of a third career.
Wow.
But in the process of writing code, you have to be very, very logical, and there's a structure to it. And that's the way I approach contracts, the same exact way, with structure and deals. So I did that when I was the marketing manager, and I also do that today as a lawyer. So
it's interesting to me, though, because that seems like you go to school for one thing, and then law school, even though you focus on contracts, and we'll talk about that in a bit, you still have all of this public speaking. You have to, there's presentations. Law school is very much about that. So what was that like for somebody who was more on the techie side to have to do that all the time?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, although I had the tech side, I actually was really good at doing those things. In fact, one job I had, I was a systems engineer, and we used to develop integrated circuits at the time that the auto manufacturers were moving from analog to digital. And so we were developing these circuits, and the sales guys would take out the engineers to talk to the other engineers. And I found that I was going more than many of the other engineers because I could talk to people, and a lot of the other engineers really couldn't talk to people.
Well, that's true. So you work both. I see I have no sides of the brain working, but you have left and right working. And that's really good. I think that's important. How did you make the choice as to what kind of law you would practice?
Just grew out of doing the deals as a marketing manager. I always wanted to put deals together. And so lawyers who put deals together are corporate transactional lawyers, and so that's what I am.
And so what happened why the topic? Because what we do with the guests, you guys probably know if you haven't been a guest yet, we try to get the guests to pick the topic, try to pick the title of the show, something they want to talk about, something that's important to you. And you did a good outline, and you talked about business relationships, the importance of building business relationships. Now, I think a lot of people don't think of attorneys as thinking that business relationships are necessarily super important. So let's talk about the topic and how that came up.
So ultimately, business is all about relationships, right? I mean, every day, every aspect of your business is about relationships. And so what I had seen over years of practicing is this issue of expectations in relationships. And the failure to meet expectations, whether that's an expectation of your partner, of your customer, whoever, your employee, right? And oftentimes those expectations miss because the parties don't, number one, really know what their expectations are, and number two, take the time to state what their expectations are.
That's such a good point. So I think a lot of times, like, we all enter into business, we've got these great ideas. We want to work with people, we want to collaborate. So that's a natural human thing. Like, you want to collaborate with people. It's so much better when you can have two minds together, two pocketbooks together, two different things. So look, Derek's messaging. We're good, Derek. But you're right. What happens is people get into it on this relationship basis, but there's nothing set in stone. They don't write out what their expectations are. They immediately think, well, I've had a few beers with you, Ed. I've gone to a soccer game, a football game, a basketball game. Our kids play sports together, and all of a sudden you are in a business relationship and nobody's set any kind of parameters or expectations.
That's right. I always say that the worst business partnerships are the people who've been friends for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. It's almost the kiss of death by saying, hey, we've been friends, because those assumptions are made. And oftentimes people are wildly different in their social settings than they are in their business settings.
That's true.
So that can negatively impact the relationship.
I find it's interesting. Danny, say that question again. Is it the same as business brokerage? Maybe he's asking specifically about what you do.
So I own an interest in a business brokerage, but what I'm doing is really more along the lines of the law practice and putting deals together from the perspective of contracts, buyers and sellers, partners. So when two or more people want to get together and go into business, we're helping them basically transition and go down that road.
Because that's the ugly part, right? So you've seen the ugly part. I've had partnerships. I'm a big believer in, if it's set up right, with any relationship, it doesn't matter if it's business or not, you have to have that conversation, and a lot of people don't. So the partnerships are so, when you're sitting down and you're trying to figure out how to build a team, how you're trying to build your business, and you have a partner sitting in front of you or a potential partner, if you're not telling them, if you're not comfortable at that moment laying it all out, you're going to face, in my experience, you're going to face so many problems later on, because trust me, the stuff that you're not saying is going to get said and become an issue at some point.
Well, and you're hitting the mark right on the head, right? So the problem is, we come into relationships in a honeymoon stage, right? Yeah. Because we've decided to go into business. We love each other. Everything's great. We're going to make
hugs
millions.
And kisses.
Right.
It's all good stuff.
And what happens is we hit the first bump, and then those issues come rushing out when that first bump comes along, and we have no way to deal with it because everybody's surprised. Everybody has an emotional reaction to being surprised, in business or in life. And so naturally that hinders what goes on. But a big factor of that is not knowing exactly what to be thinking about, right? So when we do work with people, especially partners, we have a list of topics that we make them go through.
That's great.
And you know, sometimes people say, "Oh, I don't want to rock the boat," right? We're things are going good. I don't want to rock the boat, and we're forced to say it's time to rock the boat now, because if it's a problem at the beginning, it's easier to go your separate ways and still stay friends.
Correct.
Right? That's the key.
And that the thing is too, people, when you get in and it becomes, there's anything that has a dollar sign in front of it involved in a partnership, that brings out a whole different range of emotion, reaction. That's what Ed's saying. You have to establish that up front, and I'm always amazed at people who won't do it up front. I mean, if you can't sit down with this person that you want to go into business with and have a frank conversation with them, I love the fact that you guys have a list. You have to have these conversations, because I know many people who have lost long-term friends, lots of money, because they didn't establish up front what the expectations were. So what are some of the key points? What can they do in the beginning? Some of the things that you're advising them on to do.
Sure. Well, we have to think of end of relationship, which seems kind of counterintuitive to the fact that we're at the beginning of the relationship, right? But you know, relationships end in a number of different ways. One is, you know, hey, I'm done doing this. I want to retire. Right. The other is, you know, maybe it's a forced ending to the relationship. And so what we want to do is plan for those things to say, hey, look, if somebody wants to leave, what happens? All too often you find out that, especially in the partnership context, you find out that, hey, I want to leave, but oh, wait a second, I'm leaving all this money on the table. And so then that partner can't leave,
right,
because financially it impacts them so negatively. And so as a result of that, they stay, and then, problems start to crop up because they don't want to be there. And maybe they go from working 40, 50 hours a week, really putting in some time, to saying, well, I can't sell, but I'm not going to work. And so now the other partner's looking and saying, hey, how come I'm doing all the work?
Well, and I want to bring that up because I think defining the roles are also is so important. Because I've been in partnerships and I learned the hard way, guys, just like everybody else. Hey, Tyler, I learned the hard way. I thought we were all going in and everybody would understand what their role is. So we didn't have the conversation about what the roles were. We also didn't have a conversation about who the ultimate decision maker was. We didn't have a conversation about how the chain of command worked. Because once you get into partnership, and then the minute you add any staff, that adds a whole nother dynamic to the whole party scene there. But I think it was super important, as I've learned, that I had to define, what am I going to do? What is my role in this partnership?
Yeah, so when we talk about that, especially in partnerships, we kind of talk about these employment expectations versus owner expectations. And a lot of times what happens is that starts to mingle between the two.
Right.
Separating it out is really important, because then if I do want to leave, what can happen is I can replace myself in my employment role with somebody who can perform that role. And if I'm receiving adequate or appropriate compensation, W-2 comp as an employee, then the comp goes from me and it goes to the new employee and everything's fine.
Right.
So that's very, very important. The other side of that is working hours. And I know this sounds silly, but I have this analogy of the leaky roof. And so what you typically see happen is one partner says, well, I'm going to go to work and, I'm going to take a 2-hour lunch and I'm leaving at 3, right? And so all of a sudden they're putting in 20 hours a week instead of 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And so the other partner looks at that and says, I'm bearing the brunt of everything here. Why am I doing this? And they don't get upset the first time. They don't get upset the second time.
Right.
But the 10th time they get upset, right, then it starts to come up. And that's
Correct.
what I say, a leaky roof doesn't harm your house the first day. It doesn't harm your house the second week. But if you let it go 5 years, it's going to cause the roof
Well,
to
it's
cave in.
festering. It's growing. The problem's growing, and people are not talking about it. That's the other thing. I think the communication is just so critical. You also have to establish, I think, up front, an open line of communication. If you are going into it and you're afraid to have a frank conversation with your partner, your business partners, whomever, about absolutely everything, nothing should be off the table in my experience, then you're probably going to face some sort of issue later on, because that fear just drags on and then it gets bigger, and then you let the problem fester, like Ed was just saying, and then it's not the first time, the 5th time, but the 10th time you lose your mind, and that's where a lot of the problems come up.
That's exactly right. And so you got to have that open communication. You got to have there's a lot of books that will talk about dealing with that and creating a space around that type of communication. And one of them that I like is called crucial communications or crucial discussions, and it goes over this. But in addition to that, if everything really goes to heck, right, then we need a process to end the relationship.
Correct.
And what we like to use is what some people call a shotgun provision. I call it a one cuts, one chooses provision. And so if you have 2 kids and there's one piece of cake left, right, you have, daughter number 1 cuts the cake, daughter number 2 picks which side to take. Amazingly enough, daughter number 1 becomes a brain surgeon and is able to slice that cake exactly 50-50.
That is so true.
Right? And so we incorporate that into a partnership agreement by saying, look, what we do is we say, Well, let's say that we're in a partnership, and I say, Ted, I don't want to be in partnership with you anymore. I'm going to buy you out. And I set a price in terms. I'm going to buy you out for $500,000. I'll pay you $100,000 today, and I'll pay you $400,000 over the next 4 years, right? Now, you then have a choice, and only two choices, but a choice. And the first is, do you accept my offer?
Right.
Or do you flip my offer? And so when I'm making that offer, I have to be very careful that I'm realistic in both the value of the company
Sure.
and what I can pay to you, because I might find myself on the receiving end of that offer. Now, as with anything, there's opportunity for game playing, but the reality of it is it forces us to get to that conversation beforehand because we know what could happen otherwise.
And I think people, JP, you're right, Justin, honesty and openness. I think you have to. And what's funny about this is, as you're talking, all I can think about is it's not just business relationships. You're basically describing every personal relationship as well. There's these expectations. A lot of people get into trouble because the one friend thinks they did more than the other friend, or this person did more, and so I don't think that person's as fair. It's the same kind of concept about having the openness and honesty and the ability to communicate. That's also part of the problem. Get out of your head. Yeah, right, Justin? It's just true about all relationships. I have friends that I have been friends with for 20 plus years, and we could say anything to each other. Nothing's off the table. And I think it's so important, especially in business too, that you have that ability to do it. Because when it comes back to money, I'm telling you, it changes people. It changes their perspective. It changes their expectation. And if you don't set it in advance, it's kind of like having a prenup in business. It's like having this. Okay, so I'm going to set this up for. I love what Ed said. Worst case scenario, you leave me, and here's what you get, or here's what I get. Here's what I pay. Here's what you get. If you're not comfortable setting that up front, then you're definitely not. You probably are not going to have the most successful partnership.
And that worst case scenario mindset is very important, because you know what? If we agree at some point in time to do something different, as long as we agree, we can always document that and do that instead. It's the time when we can't sit together in the same room that default relationship has to be put into place, because what's going to happen? Well, the employees are going to take sides, right? The company is going to basically die along the way. But now, I've been talking a lot about the partnership orientation, but this also applies for customers, right? So what are we going to do for the customer, and exactly how are we going to do it? And what is the customer going to do for us? I mean, the easiest example that I give is that we see payment provisions that say, we'll pay you after the invoice. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but how about 30 days after the invoice? Right? Or are you going to pay me 90 days? Because that's not going to work for me, but 30 days works for me. It's simple little things like that start to build up.
Because you think, in your mind, well, I think most people go in and they say, well, I know how I am with people. So they have an expectation that the other person is going to be the exact same way. They're going to treat them the same. They're going to operate the same. They're going to be in the relationship at the same level. And if you don't ever talk about it, that's when it becomes, well, God, they're not me. Well, guess what? They're not you.
Right.
So they're them, and they're coming from their perspective. They're coming from their background. Whatever they're bringing to the table, it's all them. You've got all you. You've got your baggage. They've got their baggage. And now you're trying to figure out how to have this relationship. But if you never talk about it, and all you're doing is going, well, I mean, this is how I am. I'm assuming they're going to be the same way. It is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, so especially in business relationships where you're dealing with another company, right? So a vendor or a customer relationship, the person that's there representing the company, the other company, could be gone tomorrow, and you could be dealing with a completely different person. So having a contract that is very, very specific about what the requirements and expectations are is essential.
So people's fear, of course, one of the fears, is that when you say the word contract and you say the word lawyer, you think, I can't afford that. So talk about it's an investment. Remember, we're talking specifically about business in this particular instance. It's an investment. It's part of doing business. And you have to be able to commit to that. If you can't figure out how important that is in the beginning, trust me, your attorney bills are going to be super $5,000 million more than they would be if you just did it up front, if you wait and let it happen. So how's the process? Is it difficult when you're sitting down with people, when you're working through those relationships contractually? What are some of the things that come up that might be that you can make the fears go away a little bit?
Well, I think the key issue is we need to understand the mechanics. Right? So again, back to expectations, but we need to understand the mechanics. How is that relationship going to work? Now, what sometimes comes up is that the business people haven't really gone through the mechanics entirely, and so we prompt them. What happens if? What happens if? And then we get that down. Then we can move to an agreement that reflects that relationship. The issue that comes up is when you're asking all of these questions and the business people don't know it, right?
Right.
And they're sometimes lawyers get a bad reputation for wanting too much detail in there, and sometimes you have to add that in for yourself because they just don't know.
Right.
And then when you put it in there, then they'll decide whether they want that or not, or some other thing. So you got to get the ball rolling, if
Right.
you will.
And so I think it's interesting. So one of the things that you put, it was, I don't know if I included it on the title, these are the people, you've got this professional suite of people, for lack of a better word, who are surrounding you too. So we're talking contractually, we're talking partnerships, but then you have outside business relationships that you're also trying to develop and build. And the most successful ones would, I imagine, follow the same thought process. So if I have an attorney in my circle, I want that attorney I want to be on the same page as that attorney. And I think a lot of people don't establish that up front. So what have you found, bye Leslie, what have you found that people can do? How do people who don't really understand how to build that relationship, what kind of advice do you give them?
It's interesting so there's a number of groups that I work with, right? And one of them is called Small Business Resource Network, and the other is a group of attorneys in different practice areas we all put together. Bottom line, it's time, right? It's time with people, getting to know them, not talking about law or accounting or insurance or whatever the case may be, but actually talking about them and learning about, hey, what are your interests? What do you like to do? What's your family like? And developing that, what we call know, like, and trust, right? And sometimes people have a difficult time saying, wow, I'm supposed to go out and meet this person I never knew before and
Right.
just develop a relationship. The way I look at it is if you have kind of a list of things in your mind that you can talk about, you can keep that conversation going until the relationship really starts to come together.
And I think I think it's critical. Guys, listen, hey, happy Friday, John. I think it's so important that you spend the time. Ed's right. So it takes time to build a relationship. You can't just have a commonality as far as an idea, and then you all may be complete opposites as far as everything else but that one single idea that you think you share. Everything else could be completely different. How you view the world, how you view relationships, how you treat people. Mm-hmm. Everything could be 1,000% different. And so spending the time, investing time in building a relationship, getting to know someone way beyond just the surface is critical in understanding if this relationship is going to work. And I think a lot of people okay, I met you at a networking event, you sound good, Ed, I'm going to send you some business, and then it doesn't turn out the way you want it to turn out. Not that Ed has ever done that, but I'm just saying in general. Or you send it to me and you're like, oh my God, I don't like your company. Well, we haven't built this relationship and this rapport. So what happens? What's going to happen? I'm not going to speak really lovely of my experience with Ed, or he's not going to speak really lovely of his experience with Ted. And that could have all been resolved if you didn't just jump into bed together and you really tried to figure out what the relationship was up front.
A lot of times, in particular, professionals aren't going to send you their clients unless they have this kind of knowledge base about who you are and what you're about. And usually there's kind of a little trial period where okay, let me send you a matter and let's see how you do with it. And really those trial balloons that are being floated are the critical time to be very, very communicative. I say, oh, well, thank you for sending John Smith to us. Mr. Smith called us. We're going to be able to work with him. Would you like to know how it's going, right? And of course, if you got to get Mr. Smith's permission, but usually that's never a problem.
Right.
And then you involve them in the process.
The involvement's so important. So one of the things that I get to do with Freedom, with Freedom Mortgage, is I love to be the one who's following up. The communication's so critical. I don't originate loans, but I am involved. I try to be as involved in that relationship as possible, because guess what? I have the time to do it, and I have the wherewithal, and I think it's so important for us to communicate that with people. An email, a text, whatever, and that's the other thing you have to be really careful about when you enter any kind of relationship, customer-wise or business or personal. What way is it that they receive information best? So I don't like the phone. It's not my favorite because I'm usually on a show with people like Ed or in a meeting, and I don't communicate well that way. But if somebody is a phone person, if I want to be in a relationship with them, I have to figure out how to meet them there. And if it's important to you, you'll do the same. Some people like texting, some people like in person only, some people like email, or a combination. Nobody cares. For me personally, I prefer a text or in person. In person is my favorite. I love it. I like to meet with people. But if you don't communicate in the same way, then you're really missing out. Like if you've got somebody who only likes to communicate in writing, and you've got somebody who only understands things auditorily and they only hear stuff and then they get it, yeah, you have to establish that up front, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, communication being one of the most important, but it's a number of things. When you're face to face, it's also, to some extent, understanding how that person behaves in the world, right? And so there's all these personality profiles and things of this nature that can help you understand, oh, this person reacts this way,
right,
therefore I shouldn't do this, or maybe I should do something else. And that can help build that relationship as well.
And I've seen people I have relationships with, I'll use Freedom as an example. There are managers who communicate best by phone, and then I have people who will communicate with a short text. Well, I'm a flowery, if you've seen any of my posts, you know I'm a flowery, I love you, you're the best person on the planet. I'm super, I emote a lot. I have to remember that not everybody does that in my business relationships. And so if I get a single word text, I'm not going to stress over the fact that I think this person's angry or not in a good place. That's just how they communicate. So figuring that out in the beginning will save you a lot of heartache as well. Figuring out how is it that they communicate. Maybe they're fantastic in person like this, but on a text, they just want to send you a word or two. You can't worry about that, but if you don't establish it, then you're going to sit there and go, oh my God, they're mad at me, this isn't working out, why were they so rude, it was too short. You really have to develop that and have that conversation with them.
And for an organization that has a lot of team, going and doing some of these personality profiles where you bring the team together so they all see what people are like. We use DISC.
I love DISC.
And it's great.
So what are you? I've got to know. What's your high?
DC.
You're a DC. So I'm like an I. I don't know if I have any other letters. Isn't that but that is so important, and you should Google DISC. It's a great, there's plenty of them that you can just try on a trial basis and do kind of a test. It's not the in-depth one, but I think that is such a great way to learn how to communicate with people and what kind of relationship, how you bring what your knowledge is and what your wants and needs are to the relationship and be able to communicate it properly with the person. I'm not, the high I's are, I'm a high I, it's very, like I'm ethereal. Everything is, I need somebody to implement. I need a DC. And if I don't have one in my life, that's not a good thing for me when I'm trying to implement anything. But it's very important to look at that kind of stuff because it's real. And I think it's really cool that you guys do that, because I think more companies should do it. More people should do it. I don't think you should necessarily have to have it for a marriage certificate, but I'm not necessarily opposed to it either. I think relationships are basically the same thing. There's one thing, if it's all physical and you haven't figured out how you all communicate, yeah, that's why our divorce rate is so through the crazy roof. All right, so relationship-wise, any parting words of wisdom, anything you want to share with them before I ask you the last question? And we're going to share all of Ed's contact information, how you can reach out to him, how you can talk to him about contracts, how you can talk to him about partnerships, anything legal that is within Ed's realm. Obviously, he's a very open book, which is lovely, because people are afraid of attorneys, as you know. I don't know why, but people are. They're very intimidated by you all. So any parting words of wisdom before I ask you the last question?
It's interesting, because that's my parting words of wisdom, right? Is that you're gonna, in your business world, right? You have to work with professionals, because you just simply can't know all of what the professionals know, have the experience of what the professionals have. And so when you're working with them, you got to feel comfortable with them, right? Whether that's an accountant, an insurance guy, or an attorney, you just have to feel comfortable. And one of my books I put in there, if you go to your attorney's office and feel when you leave like you need a shower, that's a good sign. That's not the attorney for you.
And I think that's in any relationship. So there are people that I don't enjoy being around. So if for whatever reason it's not a match, that's okay. Attorneys tend to intimidate people a little bit, because they're usually in some situation where they're 100% reliant on your ability to maneuver them through whatever they're going through. And so it can be a very scary time. It's the same on the loan side. People are giving us all their information, and they're trusting us to get probably their biggest purchase of their life. And so it can be very intimidating. And so you have to make sure not every one of my loan officers, for example, is a match for every single borrower or realtor that we work with. You have to be comfortable. And like Ed said, if you need a shower after you leave an attorney's office, a doctor's office, I don't care where you're at, remember, you don't have to do business with them.
100%.
And so you have to remember that you still have the power to do that. And if it's not a match, it's not a match. You're going to save yourself so much heartache if you will just learn that up front. And shop people, shop attorneys, shop mortgage people, shop insurance people. And so, all right, so I always like to end with mentorship. So talk about mentorship. We have somebody here, and I don't know who's behind you. Is that for you or for me?
I don't think it's for me.
Oh, it's for you.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, good.
So first would be Bill Grimm. He is an attorney in town who, when I first got here, I was a very new lawyer, and he taught me everything I know. I don't know about everything, but he certainly taught me a lot in those first few years of being a lawyer. So that's one. And then way back when, I had a manager who, it was a she, and she was in the marketing group, and really helped out greatly with kind of moving me from being an engineer to being a manager.
I love it. What's her name?
Netta Hittleman.
There you go. Netta Hillerman.
Hittleman. Yes.
All right, so you like to give the shout out. All right, you've been a joy to have on. If you want to learn more, reach out to Ed. Obviously, he's got a great perspective on things, and that's really what we all kind of need. Business relationships are super important, and you want to establish your expectations up front. It's never a bad thing to do that. And I think we would have more successful partnerships and relationships if we just did that on the front end. Thanks, Ed, for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Happy Friday. You guys stay safe out there. We've got Crazy Dorian coming, but stay safe. If you need any help, we shared a whole bunch of links earlier in the week. Be happy to share them again. But stay safe this weekend. See you guys later.
Bye, everybody.
Mwah.